4.5 years. That's how long Planet Zoo has been out for at the time of recording this video. In that time, I managed to accumulate roughly 1,700 hours, and I'll no doubt continue to add to that over time. In this video, I'm going to give you a rundown of my time with the game during that 4.5 year period, and how I managed to overcome the steep learning curve that the game presents to you. A learning curve which no doubt a lot of you have struggled with, or if you're a new player, it's something you're currently struggling with. So let's jump on in and have a look, shall we? What is up everybody, my name is Blob and welcome to a different video on the channel. Today, as I explained in the intro, we're going to be taking a look at my 4.5 years with Planet Zoo and what I've managed to get done across that 4.5 year period. As the game is slowly winding down and coming to the end of its life cycle, I thought now would be the better time than any to be able to show you this sort of thing, especially when we have the new foray of console players that are continuing to play the game and get updates over time with their own DLC releases. But let's jump in and start from the very beginning, like any story does. The background. Now, back before Planet Zoo was released in November of 2019, they held an open beta, which I think was accessible only to people that potentially pre-ordered the game. I could be wrong on that, but that was a beta that I was part of. I don't have any screenshots from my builds in that or any video gameplay footage from the beta period, but it was something that I had access to prior to the game's release. And in that beta, you had access to only a small portion of what the game had to offer at the time, a small amount of animals. You could only access certain biomes and build sets. It was just a nice little taster to tide us over until November at the game's release. Speaking of release, when the game came out, it's worth noting that I had no prior experience with previous titles like Planet Coaster. Even games like Minecraft and The Sims, when I played those, I played purely for the gameplay side of things. I never really built in them for the creative aspect. That side of it never really appealed to me, even though that when I was much younger, I used to do a lot of drawing and things like that. So it's a bit strange that those sorts of things never resonated with me, but for some reason when Planet Zoo came out, I started playing it and that side of it really got unlocked, and that is really what we're going to be covering in this video, the beginning to the end. Now, my first zoos were built like in everyone else's, in franchise. I like the additional challenge of having like the money and the conservation credits and that sort of thing, but over time I slowly waned on that and I've now switched to having a preference for sandbox mode. But in the background here you can see images from my very first zoo. They're literally dated from the end of November, so it's been a crazy long time since I've looked at some of these pictures, but you can really see how barren my habitats used to be and how basic the pathing and the detailing used to be for me back then. But all back then it was about enjoying the animals that used to be in the game and that sort of thing, and that's something I've really carried on doing over time with this game. I've just added the detail element of things to it. Speaking of detailing, I soon came to realise that one of the biggest steep learning curves for this game was the axis system, and just putting pieces together to create new things. Like a log wasn't just a log, you could use a log to build together to make a bridge for a train that goes over a railway track, as you can see in some of these images here. And then I started playing around with the terrain elevation. The terrain editing tools in this game are so powerful, and you can make some really nice things just from the terrain editing tools alone, without any background knowledge of any of the pieces or even tackling that side of it. So that's sort of where I began starting to experiment with this game in this park. And Terre de Nouveau will always hold a special place in my heart. It really has been the catalyst for everything that I've gone on to achieve with this game, and for this reason it will always be one of my favourites in the game. But later on in the game's life cycle, between December and April of 2020, we had DLCs that came to the game, the Arctic Pack and the South America Pack, and this meant that I could start a new zoo. Now, I must confess, I've completely forgotten the name of this place. I cannot remember what I called this zoo. But in the background here, some of these screenshots may be familiar to a couple of you. These actually featured on Planet Zoo's Twitter page on their Screenshot Saturday that they used to do. So that's my claim to fame, I guess, when it comes to the game. But yeah, I really love this pack. The zoo itself, I really enjoyed. I started to toy around with the foliage a bit more, as you can see with this was a jaguar habitat, I believe, in the background with these big strangled fig trees. Really loved how it turned out. And I started messing around with some of the effect pieces and waterfalls and such like thing. Foliage and rock work, I've said it time and time again, it really brings your zoos together to create something extra special. And then, like any typical Planet Zoo player, I started a new project. Quetsu Koali, I think it was called, or something like that. And it was set in a desert biome. It was Africa themed. We had hyenas, we had lions. I went up to do a giraffe and zebra habitat. It had everything that you can imagine when it comes to African animals. And again, it was just me playing around with new biomes, foliage sets that I hadn't had a chance to play with in the other biomes I'd already built in. But this one didn't really last all that long. And I think I actually took a bit of a break from the game because I actually started this one in the new hard mode that got introduced in the game with one of the updates. That hard mode back then was ridiculously broken. It used to have guest request refunds all the time, and financially your zoos would just absolutely tank, and you would ultimately have to close them, which was really sad. So I think I ended up taking a break, but coming back stronger than ever. But those of you that have been around for more short term in the channel and over on Twitch, you'll probably be looking at some of these screenshots and not actually thinking it's me. It was, like I say, this game has been a long, arduous process of learning. And speaking of learning, one of the holes in my game that I realized that I had was actual buildings of buildings, if that makes sense. So I then started jumping into sandbox games and creating things like these you can see in the background. This was a lemur habitat. I just wanted to play around with different shapes. It wasn't a square building. It was meant to be something really different. And this was me pushing myself. This took me such a long time to do. Now I could probably get this done within maybe like a week. But this took me easily maybe shy of a month to get this whole building completed. And then I went on to sort of take that practice and then start applying it to other types of buildings. We've got like a veterinary practice, and then we've got like a zoo entrance that I was building all in sandbox. They weren't part of whole zoos. They were literally meant as individual pallets, as I now call them. So in summary, we came to the end of year one. And in that time, I'd started so many projects that I can't even begin to list them all. We had a tropical island, which I eventually give up on because the water was making the game really laggy. I had multiple sandbox zoos made of pallets where I'd make random things like these education signs on the floor of like the listen and learn type things. We had underwater viewings because we had a aquatic pack come out, which had the faux rocks. So I then started building random habitats using those. I was just having a blast with it, but I never had an idea in my head of a complete zoo or project in mind that I wanted to do at this time. I was just enjoying building these little one-off habitats and builds. I'd even been asked by some friends to take part in a collaboration, and we ended up building a zoo on the South America map, the one with that's built on Machu Picchu, the big tall mountain area. Loved every second of it, and we ended up doing a second collaboration a bit further on down the line, which was Asia themed, but I just continued to push myself. I was working out the holes in my game and trying to plug them however I could. Now, I've gone back and retrospectively added this. I talked about my collaboration with friends, and I thought I'd add some screenshots of those as well. Some of these are my builds, some of those are the friends in question. But I just wanted to go back and add this retrospectively because I realised that without those people spurring me on and having the kind words to say, that it probably wouldn't push me to go on and push myself even further. I think when you have that backbone of support behind you and people commenting on this stuff, it really does spur you on. Because at the end of the day, we're always going to be our own harshest critic. So not listening to myself, but rather listening to other people and what they had to say about my builds really helped me understand that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Just because I don't like the look of something doesn't mean that someone else doesn't like the look of it. Obviously, you have to have that element of being happy with something yourself. But at the same time, a lot of the time I was, especially in this zoo, the collaboration zoo, you know, I was building it for other people as well as myself. So having other people like it was always a big spur on for me. So without them, I probably would have given up the game or played it a lot more casually than I do now. So a massive thank you to those people. But year two basically carried on as it did in the first year. Constantly starting new projects, constantly messing around with things. Especially new features that were getting added to the game. You're probably seeing in the background here a few custom custom billboards, sorry. And they were huge for making your zoos feel extra personalized. There was one back then in the collaboration project. It was like basically a water foliage screen. They really were amazing, and they helped you personalize everything so much more nicer. But with that came the DLCs, and we had new animals to build with, and that would always shift my interest in where I was playing. Obviously, in the background, you can see these ones that are on the wall here, all custom screens that I was making in Canva at the time. Another thing worth noting is that you can probably see that the screenshots that I take now are way different to what they are now from what they used to be. The ones here that you're probably seeing now, this is a build that I did for a Simply Savannah competition. And at this time, I made the discovery of NVIDIA Ansel. Now, I always knew it was a thing. I just wasn't too sure on how to use it. So I reached out to someone on Reddit who had been taking some absolutely incredible screenshots. And they sort of just gave me a few tips, a little bit of lowdown here and there. And that resulted in my screenshots really starting to change and take on a form of their own, which helped make these screenshots look that little bit nicer, like this one here with the macaques on the moon. Again, another person that without them, it probably wouldn't help me elevate my stuff to the level that I'm at now, where I'm happy with it. You know, I'm not going to say that stuff I know is god tier, but I think it really helped my screenshots pop that little bit more. At this time, I started messing around with some detailing with indoor areas. You can see here, this was a gorilla habitat that I think I made, if I remember rightly. And it was a combination of me trying to mess around with things like foliage and just the metal pieces with the mesh that we got as well. Just trying to make something a little bit more realistic, because I always felt like my habitat started to sway a bit more toward the fantastical side. Something you perhaps wouldn't see, and I just wanted to try and make it look a little bit more realistic. So yeah, you can see I'm starting to go in that direction here. We've got things like double fences. We've got these logs that I was putting around the place. This was a rhino habitat, so I think obviously the logs would have been to help stop the rhinos from bashing their horns into things accidentally and stuff like that. I was really starting to change the way I was building. This one here in the background as well, we've got just more entrances and new stuff that I was building, just trying to get extra details in wherever I could, use pieces in ways that they're not actually intended. And in October of 2021 is when I'd finally got around to starting a proper project, something that I wanted to be complete and whole, not just individual builds here and there. And here it is. It was set in North America around about the time the North America pack came out. So we had things like the moose come to the game, the prairie dogs, I think, were part of that pack as well. And I really started to push myself. Around about this time, I'd made the discovery of someone called Mike Sheets. If you are not living under a rock, you probably would have heard of him. I will link a playlist underneath this video to his Planet Botanic series. And that really was, I think, the real spur for me in terms of foliage. People have commented on foliage before with me and stuff like that. And I think without Mike and his videos and what he managed to do in terms of not just placing plants and sort of just saying, oh, this looks nice. He would go into so much detail and so much effort and care into how he was placing it, the reasoning behind placing it. There was so much there that I don't think ever gets said enough about. And I think it really helped me push with this zoo in particular. I end up doing so much in this zoo. Again, never end up finishing it, but I managed to get so much done here. You can see the pictures just evolving over time. We started off with the lake, and then we started getting more toward the entrance, and then toward the latter end of the whole build, I had a reptile house that I never actually end up doing a roof for in the end, but for the most part, the roof was there and the main structure was there. But I was starting to toy around with new things. Obviously, we had beavers, so I ended up making like a custom beaver dam on the lake as well. I was continuing to do my work with Canva and making custom screens as well. And I spent so much time in this place, honestly. It was such a joy to go through and do this place. The North American animals, any of you that have used them before will know that the models are absolutely amazing. But again, you can probably see that there's a bit of a disparity between what I was building back then compared to where I potentially am now. So it shows that even over the course of, when was this? Like, this was 2021. Over the course of like 2 years, 3 years, it's just continued to go on strength to strength. I think you just have to keep at it. I hate to say it, but you do have to keep at it. Eventually something will click and you'll find your niche, but I was really liking what I was able to get done here. I was toying around with different elevation changes. We had a grizzly bear that would be halfway up the hill, but working with those terrain changes was something I hadn't really done before. So introducing those in felt like it was adding a new layer to my game. But I think the main thing about this whole place was that I was toying around with the terrain tools, making these mountains that you can see in the background, toying around with the terrain tools to get water to work how I wanted it to. I didn't want it to just be like a sheer drop. I wanted it to have these slopes that slowly went down into some water and had like a more natural feel to them. That was the main point of this place. I wanted it to be a complete frame rather than just a flat terrain. So when you would stand somewhere, you'd have the mountains in the background, you'd have trees in the foreground, then you'd have the habitat in front of that to just create the whole place. And it had a lot of lore behind it as well, behind this whole zoo. I really loved it, and probably behind my first ever zoo, this is a close second place, because this is where I really felt like I was able to sort of start flexing and show some of my skills I'd been developing over the time with the game. So yeah, Elkhorn, absolutely love this place. It was supposed to have a successor, but in the end I never ended up doing it. If you guys know who Pacha is, Pacha's been doing a zoo which I think is very similarly themed to this, North American mountainous areas. I think he is doing a way better job of a North American map than I could probably ever do. So make sure you check that out as well. I'll put that in the description as well. But toward the tail end of this project, I started to then switch my focus back to the building side of things with the reptile house. Like I said, I've been working on the foliage and the terrain work side of things, and I was really happy with it. And then when it came to the idea of this reptile house, I was like, we're going to do it again. We're going to try and build buildings. And even to this day, buildings are something that I look at and I think I'm never going to be able to do anything like incredible with this. It's just always been an Achilles heel of mine. Probably always will be, but no one's ever going to be perfect at this game. That's the thing to remember when you're playing this game. Don't go in trying to perfect every aspect of your game. Just work on certain elements of your game that you think you can improve upon. If there's something you don't like doing, there's no point trying to stick with it. If you enjoy the foliage side of things, stick with foliage. Watch Mike Sheets' videos and then go back to it with that fresh new mindset. But yeah, this has been Elkhorn, and then we move on to something new completely after with this. And then I was back to one-off builds, of course. This was something that ended up going on to the start of 2022. I did feel like I was getting somewhere though with the game as well. You know, I was really happy with some of the stuff I was making. So we had this like island, and then I ended up making a European the European pack came out around about this time with the restaurants, and started making something for the lynxes and the fallow deer and stuff like that, and ended up building a cool restaurant as well. So I did feel like I was getting somewhere with it. I did feel like every time I was starting something new, I could take something that I'd learned into my next project. And my next project was going to be around the corner really, really soon. And that was going to be called Orchid Zoo. But I'll talk about that in just a second. In the background, you can probably see how the changes in my screenshots had started to come around. This was obviously thanks to the person I mentioned earlier on in the video. This is the restaurant. Absolutely loved how it turned out. God, I kind of regret not saving this as a workshop blueprint. By the way, some of the zoos that you're seeing in this are actually still available on the workshop. Elkhorn is still available as something on the workshop if you want to go and have a look at that. I don't know if Orchid Zoo ever made it in. This one definitely is on there, Scandinavian Zoo. This one I didn't really care much about the animals, I have to admit. I was purely going for awe, shock and awe. You go in and you go into Tejikam or whatever the equivalent would have been, and the whole point was to just blow you away with the aesthetics and the look of the game. This was my first foray into a taiga tundra biome, and this is the main thing that's swung me back around to wanting to do it with my newest project. But Orchid Zoo was the next one, and this one didn't run on as long as Elkhorn, but I think it was the one that I think was the next step up. You go up in steps, and like I say, I was building these little things here and there, and I really think that this was the next peg up from what I was doing beforehand. And we had a big cat area, we had things like Bengal tigers, we had pumas in here, we had the Amur leopards, because at the time the conservation package, I think the conservation pack came out toward the tail end of me losing interest in this project. So you can see the Amur leopards. Loved it. Loved this place so much. Again, I think this one almost got completed as well, but I think again it came around to me just needing to do a certain area, and it just felt like it was too far out of my skill set, so ended up just sort of pushing it back and not carrying on with it. But we were doing the same thing as what we've been doing in all the others. We had custom billboards, we had some really cool animals. We had the red pandas as well. It wasn't just big cats. That's something that's again further down the line. We ended up having like a fox habitat as well. This was the indoor viewing for the fox. And then it had a really cool feel to this building, actually. I kind of wish that I'd kept this as well. But yeah, here's the puma habitat. Sightlines was something that was starting to come into my builds a lot as well. I just wanted you to be able to stand in certain areas of the habitats and just be in awe of what you were seeing. Playing around with the elevation, playing around with sight lines, it really was starting to all come together and become who I think I am now as a builder. This is probably the closest that we can get to what I build like now without going too far back in time. And I loved it. But shortly after losing interest in Orchid Zoo, I obviously went back to building one-off projects. So in the background here, I think this was for the gibbons as well when the that next pack came around. It was originally going to be for the capuchin monkeys, but I think as I was building this and finishing this up, the pack came out with the gibbons or the siamangs, so I ended up using them instead, because why wouldn't I? They were a lot cooler than the capuchin monkeys at the time. But this, I think this was the point where I started to get to, before pause started up. This was just before pause started up, and I got to a point where I was happy with my skill set, and it was the first time that I could say that, in all honesty. My foliage work, I felt like I was really happy with it. The terrain work that I was able to pull off, I was really happy with it. There were still little things like buildings and fences. You can see here the fencing isn't quite potentially up to scratch, but I think the screenshots of it again were doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So I just carried on. I carried on building my little mini projects that I was doing, carrying on with new little sandbox projects. All because in my mind, I knew that it was leading up to something. And I was like, if I just hone this a little bit, I can say, okay, I'm happy with this. Let's try working on this. And the idea was I could start a new zoo, put it all together and create something that I was really, really happy with. Even the buildings indoor here, like this was the gibbon house that ended up going around to, it split off into two sides. You had the gibbons on the left, and then you had the tapirs on the right. And even the buildings were starting to shape up, which says a lot about where I was getting to with this game. But obviously you saw the screenshots at the start. This was something that I wasn't pulling off at the start. It's something that I had to sort of persevere with. I was taking breaks in between, so even though I've been playing for 4.5 years, don't think that it's just been 4.5 years of just me headbutting a brick wall until eventually it started to go in. This was me taking quite long intermittent breaks and then coming back when a new DLC would come out or something like that. But all of this was obviously leading up to this pause. Pause is where probably a lot of you found this channel and have stuck around for, and for that I am truly grateful. Pause was my first foray with my new skill set, going into a project knowing that I potentially had the skills to do what I've been thinking about ever since the game first came out, and that was to build a big cat sanctuary. And even though to this day that this project remains unfinished and I'm still working my way through it potentially, again, there's going to be no ETA on when that could be coming back. Without it, I don't think I would be still doing what I'm doing. You know, it was so nice to see people enjoying it, people chipping in, even if we haven't had any huge spurts of growth. You know, all of the kind positive words, like I said earlier on, they really help you push on to do bigger and better things. And I think that's what Pause was. It started off as just sort of a small project with a few ideas in my mind, and it just blossomed, in all honesty. Some of the stuff that you're seeing in the background here, you'll all remember from previous videos and stuff like that. A lot of these cool animals had names as well that was very kindly contributed, but this was, I think, my first project where everything was slotting in together nicely, and there wasn't any disparity between, obviously, when you start a new project and you look at what you were building at the start of that project compared to the end, you can see skill gaps. You'll go back and say, look at an entrance that you built 2 months ago and just think, do you know what, this is not all that great, and then you'll either rebuild it or you'll start something new. Pause, I don't think, ever had that. Pause had more consistency throughout it, from the beginning to its current end, than what I've had with any of my builds prior to this. So Pause, again, special place in my heart. Adore it. I think a lot of you guys adored it as well. So glad I did it. But I think the problem, obviously, I've spoke about this in the last video, the problem started to then become, you've got this game with 180 animals and I'm only utilizing 12 of them, and it really didn't feel like I was playing the game to its fullest potential, and by restricting myself it did become very tiresome. So then I started to build random things again. You know, I was doing this on stream. I ended up building like a crocodile habitat, or a caiman habitat, sorry. I ended up doing like a red panda habitat, all ones you can see in the background here. All while in my mind thinking, do you know what, I really want to go back to the tiger tundra. You know, that Scandinavia zoo, across all the zoos that I've ever built, seems to be the one that stuck with me the most for some strange reason. Hence it's then come back full circle to where we're at now. But yeah, I just carried on with the random builds and where we're at today. We obviously had Broadmoor Farm, which we had touched upon on stream a few times, but at this point I hadn't really disclosed what was going to be going on next. But yeah, this is it. This is my 4.5 year journey. It's been a good one. I hope to have many more months of playing this game, and yeah, there's obviously one more animal pack still later down the line. We're still working on the project that we're doing now. If you want to see that, then you know where to click. That's right, you click right here and it will show you a mini tour. I'm doing all the streams for it as well over on Twitch. That will be down in the description as well. But I hope you've taken away from this video what I wanted you to take away from it, and that is that even someone with no experience of building games whatsoever, no experience of like creative games in that regard, can persevere and create something pretty nice in the end. But I'd like to thank all of you for being here. Peace out. I love you all. Bye bye. Bye bye.